Our reading today comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." And so they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to him, "You also go work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. And when they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. May God bless the hearing and the living of this word. And from the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, from Divine Love and Wisdom, number 47. Divine love and wisdom cannot fail to be and be manifested in others that it has created. The hallmark of love is not loving ourselves, but loving others and being united to them through love. The hallmark of love is also being loved by others, because this is how we are united. Truly, the essence of all love is to be found in union, in the life of love that we call joy, delight, pleasure, sweetness, blessedness, contentment, and happiness. The essence of love is that what is ours should belong to someone else. Feeling the joy of someone else as joy within ourselves, that is loving. Feeling our joy in others, though, and not theirs in ourselves, is not loving. That is loving ourselves, while the former is loving our neighbor. These two kinds of love are exact opposites. True, they both unite us, and it does not seem as though loving what belongs to us or loving ourselves in the other is divisive. Yet it is so divisive that to the extent that we love others in this way, we later harbor hatred for them. Step by step, our union with them dissolves, and the love becomes hatred of corresponding intensity. So, my friends, today we have our second parable in a row from the lectionary, the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Now, at this point, we find ourselves almost 3/4 of the way through the Gospel of Matthew, where several chapters are devoted to Jesus' teachings. In a few more chapters, Jesus will sit down to the Last Supper, and the events will play out that lead to his death and resurrection. But for now, he has a lot to say about what the kingdom of heaven looks like. And the imagery in this story is one that the disciples and their contemporaries would be very familiar with. It is common in the Old Testament for the nation of Israel to be described as a vineyard, with the owner of that vineyard being God, and the harvest time, or the collecting of wages, as a time of judgment. So, ancient hearers were primed to think about this story in transcendent terms and to wonder what it means for the kingdom of heaven to be made manifest here in the world. And like all parables, there is a surface plausibility that draws us in. We recognize and understand this world of hiring people and working for pay. We understand that grapes need to be harvested and that the owner is the one who must make that happen. And last week, we were talking about talents being the most valuable kind of coin in those days. And now we are talking about a denarius, one of the smallest. A denarius was the basic wage for a manual laborer. But even so, it was barely enough to support a family. So in the beginning of the story, the landowner was acting as one might expect. Fair according to custom, but not particularly generous. But then suddenly, the landowner starts acting a little differently. He keeps looking for workers even though he hired some already. We might wonder, why is that? Is there a bumper crop this year? He hires more people and then still more people. And then even at 5 o'clock in the evening, when there is only 1 hour left in the day, he hires more people. Well, whatever, we might shrug, it's his vineyard. But then it gets even more strange. He pays everyone an equal amount no matter how long they have worked. Now, obviously, we expect the workers hired later to get a commensurably smaller amount of money. We don't have any expectation that the landowner would stiff them. He seems like a good guy, but 1/12 of the work should equal 1/12 of the pay, right? And so the folks who have been working all day long are a bit perplexed. Well, they think, if the last workers get a denarius, then we should get more. Surely if the landowner has enough money to pay the last workers extra, he has enough to pay us extra too. And when he doesn't pay them more, it seems unfair. We may well relate to these workers, as it is understandable to want to look for symmetry in things. Fairness and equality and consistency are often ways that we all make sense of the world. But instead of things going in the normal way, the landowner starts acting differently from our expectations. And certainly he has a right to do what he wants with his money. But what does that mean for the way we understand the world? The way in which we understand who deserves what? Because surely we're not supposed to run our businesses this way. We can't just pay people whatever we want, whenever we want. Can we? As we talked about last week, the purpose of parable is so that we might question our systems, question the way we look at the world. Parables help us remember the limits of our systems and remind us that they are human systems and not divine ones. And in this parable, we are being shown that the economy of work and the economy of love are two different but interrelated things. I recall from seminary that one of my professors came to an understanding about this parable through his own experience of parenthood. He spoke of the joy and love he felt at the birth of his son, and that upon learning eventually that they were pregnant again, with twins even, he worried he would never love them as deeply and as fully as his first child. But of course, we all know the end of this story. We know that miraculously when his twins were born, his ability to love expanded, and he loved them just as much, and in ways he couldn't have imagined. We sometimes underestimate the expansiveness and the resilience of love. We love more and more according to our willingness to be opened up. And this is because love, it doesn't come from us. All love comes from God, a constant inflow according to our willingness to accept it. Last week, we spoke about the infinity of God's forgiveness. And of course, that forgiveness is simply a function of the infinity of God's divine love. Human systems are often built on the assumption of scarcity, but the economy of love is built on the opposite, love's abundance. And so how then are we to understand this parable, where we see the apparent collision of two economies based on very different assumptions? And here I use the word economy not in a strict financial sense, but in a more archaic way, to express the way something is organized and thought about. There is the economy of work. the arithmetic of fair-minded give and take. We do this, we get that. But love doesn't work that way. It can't fit into a budget or a business plan, and it is way more expansive than one kind of system can express. And additionally, Swedenborg tells us that in the Spirit, uses or ends reign, by which he means that the Spirit not only looks to what might be good or right in a given moment, but also looks towards the end goal, and is always striving for the best possible outcome that supports human thriving and loving and growing long term. And so the gift of this parable is that for a moment, the veil was drawn back and the economy of love was revealed. For the workers who were hired last, there was no indication they were not working due to a fault of their own. When asked why they weren't working, they simply replied, "No one had hired us." The parable doesn't tell us why this was the case, but we know from the world there are so many different reasons work cannot be found that are out of a person's control. Perhaps by this time the workers were starting to panic, for the day was almost done and they would not have the money they needed to support their households. What a difficult and stressful life is the life of the day laborer. But in the last moment, someone did hire them. Okay, they think, at least I'll make a little bit. Imagine their relief then to get a whole day's wage, a wage they had given up on. Sometimes what is fair isn't the same as what is just. It was not fair that the last workers should get a whole day's wage. I think even they would agree. But was it not also unjust that their families should not have food to put on the table? The economy of love was looking for more than the economy of work that day could provide. It was looking to fill hungry bellies and to help the downtrodden feel like they were seen and they mattered. But even so, all the talk of love doesn't necessarily make it feel better when you've been working hard and you see someone else rewarded for less work. Years ago, my daughter's response to this text was, "Oh, I hate that parable." I opened my mouth to expound, but she stopped me. "Don't try to tell me the moral, it's just not fair." Believe me, I get it. On the face of it, lack of equality can sometimes feel extremely discouraging and diminishing. We must note that the structure of the parable is key. This is not a situation where all the workers were hired at the same time and some worked hard and some did not, and the owner decided to be generous to all anyway, maybe not even paying attention to who was working the hardest. This is not what happened in the parable. The parable is instead asking about what should happen to those who are left behind by our systems. And the instructive part, the lesson, is in how the first workers chose to view the situation. They were certainly justified on grounds of fairness, but were they viewing the situation with eyes of justice? What the text translates as, "Or are you envious because I am generous?" is literally in the Greek, "Is your eye evil because I am good?" What kind of eyes were those first workers using? And what kind of ultimate outcomes were they looking for? Were they looking with an eye of love? The first servants were wanting equality, and they were seeing equity. And these are similar but not identical ideas. The first is about equal treatment, but the second is concerned with equality of outcome. The first workers were looking for equality of hourly wage, and let us not forget, with good reason, equality is important. We are lucky the owner seemed to be a good person. He could have been cruel and erratic and could have decided to pay them all differently hourly wages because he didn't like some of them. Principles like equality of hourly wage are very good when they counter things like racism and sexism. They express love in their own way, through order and the inherent value of each person and each person's work. But equality or sameness is not the only way to serve the principle of love, because love also looks to ultimate outcome, to the end goal. The first workers were clearly not thinking in this way, being only concerned with themselves. Did they have in mind the families of the last workers? Probably not. Sadly, we are all human, and oftentimes we only want fairness and equality when it serves our needs. Economies based on scarcity do have a downside. They induce us to live into the insecurity of constant comparison. And how can we not find ourselves self-centered in that context? We forget that, as we heard in our Swedenborg reading, the nature of true love is to see something from another's perspective, to be happy when others are happy. And so we are reminded, God's love is calling us to look above and beyond human systems and to look at them clearly in order to see whether they are helping or hindering love becoming manifest. Amen.